Hello, everyone that came today. My name is Ruth McIntyre, and on behalf of the Edina Garden Council, I would like to welcome you to today's virtual presentation, Let the Houseplants Out, about a zone-pushing St. Paul garden. Some of the people who join us today via Zoom are members of the St. Anthony Park Garden Club, the Bloomington Garden Club, the Minnesota Rock Garden Society, the St. Thomas the Apostle Community Garden, and of course the Edina Garden Council. We also have visitors and family and friends that are coming from Texas, California, Washington, Florida, and some of Gail's family from Winnipeg, Canada. And we heard that we might even have a visitor from London. It's very exciting. We welcome all the family and friends and members of the public who have been invited to join us. Feel free to use the chat window to say where you're from, to comment about the plants, or to say hello to other folks that you know in this program today. And of course, type your questions in there for Gail and this program. Our speaker today is the Edina Garden Council member, Gail Hudson. She is a multi-Emmy award-winning storyteller, a writer, a photographer, and a video producer with a master's degree in horticulture from the University of Minnesota. Gail writes and photographs gardens for Northern Gardener magazine, and we're talking about her latest article today in the January issue. She's also a garden coach and a garden designer for homeowners in the metro area and out of state. She owns Gail Hudson Media, a video production and communications company, and she works with many clients, including the University of Minnesota Extension's team of horticulture educators. At the moment, she's producing a new series of videos on care for houseplants, including orchids, that will be coming out in the next few months. She is co-author of the Teacher's Guide for 10 Plants That Changed Minnesota, a Minnesota Historical Society textbook, which is taught by hundreds of schools across Minnesota. Gail also spent 27 years in the broadcast news industry as a journalist, working for KSTP TV, producing news content, and the On the Road show with Jason Davis. In the summer, you can find her not only in her own garden in Minneapolis, but volunteering in the grass collection at the Minnesota Arboretum and coordinating her church's community garden. And now I am very happy to hand over the meeting to Gail.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for that lovely introduction. Good morning to everybody. And my thanks to the Edina Garden Council members who are making this Zoom presentation possible this morning. That was Ruth McIntyre, Maura Katyal, and Karen Platt. And hello to everyone from California to Canada to England. A warm welcome to you. We're thrilled that you've joined us either now or if you're watching at a later time. I know a bunch of folks who are going to be doing that later today or sometime this week soon. Garden lovers are everywhere, so that's great. And I encourage you to use the chat this morning to share your thoughts. Let us know where you're from, what plants you like that you see as the presentation goes along. We put a fun question in there for you. And most importantly, if you have a question. So because of the number of people joining us today, would like to have your questions for the end, but write them in the chat when you think of one, and Maura is going to be watching for them. Before we dive into our topic, let me get this going here. I just wanted this reminder that in these difficult times and in the winter, how restorative gardens can be and will be again this year for all of us dealing with a pandemic and the impacts of it. To quote the words of author Sue Stuart-Smith, she's a British psychotherapist who has observed, gardening is about setting life in motion, and seeds help us recreate the world anew. That's from her new book called The Well-Gardened Mind. Let me see if I can show that in the camera here, where she examines the remarkable, powerful effects of nature on our health and well-being. It's well worth reading, but it's good to keep in mind how good that is for us to be in gardens and to garden. The act of gardening is healthy and good for us. So let us restore ourselves a little bit on this very frigid Monday for those of us here in Minnesota and Canada, and look at a lovely, unusual garden in St. Paul. I visited the Phelps-Munson Epperly Garden throughout the summer last year and wrote the cover story for this month's Northern Gardener magazine. It's a publication of the Minnesota State Horticultural Society that's out on the stands now. And if you want this magazine, it's a great magazine written for gardeners. There's only a few ads at the very end of the magazine. Otherwise, it's chock full of content. It's a benefit for members, along with lots of discounts to different places where you can buy great plants. And all you have to do is go to northerngardener.org to sign up. So let the house plants out. But we're going to go way beyond what I've put in the article today. I'm going to show you all kinds of things in the Marcus Phelps-Munson garden. So what we're going to do and see, what you'll see and hear today, we'll tour Marcus's garden. There's Marcus there on the right side of the picture. Some highlights. We'll of course talk about those great zone pushing plants, but lots of rare and unusual plants too that you might not have seen. And Marcus has a collection, quite a collection of bromeliads. So I'll show you those and talk to you a little bit about bromeliads today. We'll talk to Marcus about his overwintering techniques, because he has to do that for some of the tender plants that he likes to incorporate in his garden. He's going to give us some gardening tips and show us what great resources he's used to find plants and information about those plants. And again, we'll take all those questions at the very end of the program. So I'd like to introduce Marcus to you. Marcus is a relative newcomer to Minnesota. He's a member of the St. Anthony Park Garden Club, the Minnesota Rock Garden Society, and of January, officially, he is a new master gardener. And Marcus is joining me today from his lovely home in St. Paul. Hello, Marcus. You can unmute yourself.
Very good. Good morning, Gail. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
So I just wanted to give you a brief background on Marcus. He started gardening, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You started gardening when you were 8 or 9 years old in West Palm Beach, Florida. You dug a little vegetable garden there, and then, of course, moved to a bunch of different places. And about 15 years ago, you moved to Seattle and lived in Sammamish, which is what, 30 miles east until you moved to Minnesota, right?
Yes.
And you bought a new home there. And tell us a little bit about that. What were the gardening conditions like? This is going to give us some perspective on how Marcus gardens here in Minnesota, what he was doing in Seattle. So what were those conditions like?
Moving to Sammamish, the weather was very different for me. There was a lot more rain, and I was amazed at the variety and lushness of things that could be grown. So we started exploring, and this is the yard after about 12 years of being there. Initially, it was just a square plot of grass.
Wow, you got quite a few plants there. And you were saying that you like to explore nurseries, and that's how this got to be so large.
Yes, I was really amazed at the variety of nurseries. And even around here, if you visit nurseries on a regular basis, you will find one or two just unusual things at different nurseries throughout the year. So you have to persist.
And you like to travel with an empty suitcase. I remember you telling me about that.
Well, it's empty when I leave.
People out there do this too, but tell us what you do, Marcus.
Yes. We'll often leave with an additional empty suitcase, and depending on where we're traveling, visit nurseries, friends, etc., and yes, slowly fill up the other suitcase. I started doing that because initially I was throwing away clothes to put plants in. So now I take an extra suitcase.
So at least you don't have to get rid of your wardrobe.
Exactly.
So we're looking at your backyard, and I did want to point out a couple of things here. I'm going to use the cursor to talk about this tree. I love this tree.
That is a contorted willow tree. Everything in the backyard was bought as a smaller plant that just was carted in the car as a twig. And willow trees grow very rapidly. But we chose it because it has small, delicate leaves that allow a lot of sun to still come through. Because as you know, in Seattle, it's often overcast. And so sunlight is at a premium.
Right. And did you, you brought this one? Did you bring a seedling of this one? Or is it the locust that you did to your yard here?
The locust, which is the golden yellow tree on the right, was also started as a twig. And yes, I have since bought one for here, and it's been growing in our yard here for 3 years.
So that corkscrew, it's called a corkscrew willow, right?
Yes.
My understanding that it is short-lived, but in the winter you do get these squiggly branches in it. So that's really fun to have here in Minnesota, especially in the winter.
Yes, it has just beautiful winter interest. The only reason I have not planted one of those here is because they have very shallow roots. And so they tend to be on the surface and they're tripping hazards. They have limited space. So
you don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Well, let me show you a couple other photos from Marcus's yard in Seattle. So this, I said, wow, when I saw this photo that Marcus had sent to me for the presentation, yellow lady slipper, which is a Minnesota native. It blooms from May to June, and you can see it in woodlands around Minnesota. I've seen it at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, but I haven't seen anybody with it in their garden. So that's really cool. Was it pretty easy to grow?
Yes, as long as I amended the soil for better drainage, and this particular area gets no direct sunlight in the garden. So that was something to pay close attention to throughout the year.
Okay.
Areas that do and don't get sun.
Okay. Yeah, it's beautiful. I looked online, I thought, how much would I have to spend to buy one? And they are the lady slippers that you can buy range from like $85, $90. So you have to really want that plant and fingers crossed that it's going to survive. And then this over here on this side, I did want to point out this plant. It's the shredded umbrella plant. Great plant, and we'll talk about that for a little bit later, in a few minutes. This looks pretty tall. How tall is that, Marcus?
It's about 3 feet tall. That plant was about 6 years old at the time that picture was taken. Okay. Started just from 2 small shoots.
Okay. Now, Marcus has had to deal with a real shift in cold hardiness zones. From Sammamish near Seattle, which is right over here. We're talking about zone 7. which is the average annual extreme minimum temperature. So that goes down, means that the temps go down to maybe 5 degrees, compared to what he has to deal with here in St. Paul now, of 25 below, quite a difference. But you enjoy non-hardy plants in your garden, even though it can go down to 25 below, right? Correct?
Yes, most definitely. Some we dig and bring inside either the house or the garage if they need a cold period. And then some others that are more borderline, I might divide and leave a portion in the yard and cross my fingers.
Okay, okay. But you don't like the word house plants, right? Nothing's a house plant.
Yeah, no,
it's all part of the garden. Okay, well, I'm going to show you, Marcus, if you want to mute yourself, we'll go through and I'll show some photos of your yard here in St. Paul and talk about some of the plants, and Marcus will join us again at the towards the end. So this is where Marcus lives. He lives in this beautiful brick and stone house close to the west entrance of Como Park, which is a very pretty area. This is the front. The brick is important to note because I think that has helped Marcus a lot when it comes to being a zone pusher. And by the way, there is a Facebook page called Zone Pushers. Did you know that, Marcus? Of people who like to push the zone with their plants. So that's a lot of fun. This is something I wanted to just point out in Marcus's front yard. There's a stone retaining wall and the sidewalk is kind of down below. And Marcus likes to plant vegetables in there along with flowers, and people can take them, right? As they walk along if they so choose. So some corn and some squash, which is a lot of fun. This is the part of the backyard. And Marcus and his husband, Gary, put up this beautiful fence that really matches the house beautifully. And it has these open panels. And Marcus has used these panels to plant all different varieties of clematis. My understanding, Marcus, is that you haven't met a clematis that you don't like, right? And I particularly like this one, this clematis tridronata in the star shape, really, really lovely. He does have a small vegetable garden, so they do grow vegetables to eat themselves. That's kind of on the side of the garage. Here's another panel back here. It looks like another clematis back there. And then here's that bromeliad collection. I think you have 20 some plants there in the collection. We'll talk about that too. We'll mostly right now we're going to focus in on this area, and Marcus has lots of tender plants and zone pushing plants in this area. It's a kind of a part shade area. One thing I should tell you about Marcus's garden, it's a garden of very complex layers. There are layers of zone appropriate, zone pushing, zone tender plants here. Marcus likes to layer texture, particularly when it comes to foliage, combining leaf shapes and leaf shapes and sizes, I would say, layers of plant heights, flower color, and of course, plant seasonality. So Marcus gardens, when he's gardening, he's conscious of spring ephemerals being replaced by other plants later in the season. And he also is pretty fond of plants with cool scents, and I'll talk about one of those towards the end here. So foliage for Marcus is king, and this, as he told me, flowers are wonderful, but they don't last forever. This plant is actually, it had been called a ligularia, but they took it out of that category, that scientific classification, and now it's considered a farfugium. And this particular one, argentum, with this creamy white edge, is considered the most beautiful and prized member of the genus Farfugium, and Marcus has it. It's from China, Japan, and Korea, and it produces these yellow daisy-like flowers on 30-inch stalks in the fall. So very cool plant. But here, let's take a look at some of the foliage plants that Marcus likes. This one I just saw and I went, wow. This is called a shield leaf. Astilboides tabularis. See that word tabularis? It's like the word table, and boy, does this look like a table, kind of tilted on its side, and it's 15 inches across at one time when I measured it. But I understand that these leaves can get up to 2 to 3 feet in diameter. The plant grows to about 4 feet tall. It produces this long stalk for the flower, and this is what the flower looks like. It's kind of like an astilbe, hangs up there above the table like a lantern, which is very cool. Really fun plant, shield leaf, and it is a zone 5, but Marcus has it in the corner by the brick wall of the garage, and I think that does a lot to keep it there, going and thriving, not just growing, but thriving in that corner. Here's a good example of how Marcus likes to plant in layers. And we're going to dissect these layers a little bit. So we'll start at the top and work our way down. So let's talk first about the green dragon. It's an Erasema plant. Erasemas began to be available in the late 1990s thanks to Dan Hinckley of Heronswood, who had a nursery out in Washington. And Marcus is lucky enough, before it closed and before it was bought up by Burpee, right? He was able to visit it and buy some plants. He's sorry he didn't buy more plants there because it's very cool. But this plant, green dragon, here's another picture of it with the spiral shaped leaves, is native to Minnesota. It's one of 2 Erasemas that's native to Minnesota. It's a zone 4 plant. It's particularly found in southeastern Minnesota, but it is considered a rare plant species by the Minnesota DNR. Great for deep shade, but can be planted in the sun. It produces a little small green flower spathe, which isn't very noticeable, but it has this mottled stem. But it's great. You're growing this plant for the foliage. A couple interesting facts about this. When the plants are small, they produce only male flowers. It gets a little bit bigger, then it starts to produce male and female flowers. And then when it's at its largest size, it produces only female flowers, becomes entirely female. Green dragon was also used as a medicinal and ritual plant of the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin. And they use the root in sacred bundles to encourage second sight in dreams. So Marcus told me that he likes them because they're low maintenance and they're up early in the spring when nothing else is going on in the garden. They're coming up with the tulips and the daffodils. So that's green dragon. Let's go to work our way down. Here's that shredded umbrella plant. It's a zone 4 plant, looks tropical, but zone 4, how about that? And it has these shredded leaves, and these leaves can be the size of a dinner plate. They can get that large. Best in sun-dappled woodland conditions, but it tolerates full shade. This is a pretty shady site for it. I want to show you that when it does come up out of the ground, it's up on the stem, and they do look like a little grouping of umbrellas. The plant has rhizomes in the soil, and the colony of these little umbrellas can grow for you. It's from the aster family, native to Asia and Eastern Russia. And here are the flowers. They're small, pale pink or white clusters on stems above the plant. They're not super showy. You're really growing it because you're getting cool little umbrellas in your garden. The next plant we'll look at is the cobra lily. That's these two tri-leaf. That's one plant that comes up, and it can take, this is a zone 6 plant. It's a more tender plant. Can take 3 to 5 years before it flowers in the spring. It's related to Jack in the Pulpit, produces a cluster of red berries. It goes dormant in the summer. And another cool plant, very shiny leaves. I'm going to go back to this picture, but I just wanted to point out this leaf and how it has this smooth edge around, comes down to a point, and then the ribs are in the middle. And then it has this kind of shiny surface, and you can see what the water drops look like. It's just a really stunning foliage plant for the garden. And then down at the bottom of our layering here, we have some spiderwort. We know about this plant, so I won't talk about that one. And then lungwort down here, another great shade plant. And you can get these mottled leaves from that plant. And it's great filling in underneath all these taller plants in the garden. So really fun. Here's another plant that I really think is cool and I wanted to mention to you, and it's a Tian Nanjing. I hope I pronounced that right. It is a zone 5 plant, but again, we're against brick in his house. And it's another Jack in the Pulpit relation from Asia. It's used in Chinese herbal medicine for coughs and for colds. But you find it throughout much of China, as well as India, Thailand, and Taiwan. And it grows from an underground tuber, and it has this mottled pseudostem. But the other interesting trait are there, and I'm hoping you can see this, these little tips that hang down like little threads, couple inches down from each leaf. And the scientists think that that's so that the plant can shed moisture. The drops trickle down, and then they come down to the tips and drop down on the ground around the roots around the plant. So really interesting. Here's the flower, this green and purple striped flower. Pitcher style flower with a much longer tip that goes down, that's all purple. And then I think that's like 8 or 10 inches long, maybe in length, and really, really pretty. And one of those tall things, here's another picture that you can see the leaves a little bit closer. Really great texture, very interesting, coming out, radiating out of a center. Here are a couple more photos, and these are tender plants with great foliage that I wanted to show you. This is a tree of India, or voodoo lily. The Edina Garden Council folks might remember Diane Plunkett-Latham mentioning an aroid, also called a common name as voodoo lily. This is different. That voodoo lily was Soromatum venetum with circular leaves. This one comes up like a tree. It comes up on one single stem and then sprouts this foliage here on the sides. It's in the philodendron family, comes from a tuber, and which can get as big as a grapefruit. And when it reaches blooming size, you get this, a reddish purple spathe that appears first before the stalk and the leaf. And Marcus, have you had one of these yet? Thumbs up if you have.
No, hopefully the tuber will be large enough this year, the largest tuber, to flower, but no, in the 3 years, it hasn't yet.
Hasn't yet, but you've gotten the great tree.
Yes.
So, and the flower smells like dead meat to attract carrion flies that are the natural pollinators, right? So that's the tree of India, a really exotic contribution to the garden. Here's another favorite of mine. I just think this is cute as can be. It's called Spotty Dotty. It's a mayapple plant, and it's an Asian mayapple. It's a variegated hybrid of the mayapple. and grows zone 6. So that means Marcus has to probably dig it up, right? And produces these pendulous flowers, and they're kind of tucked under the leaf here. And eventually you get a green kind of lemon-shaped fruit. These turn into this lemon-shaped fruit, and that's the apple, hence the May apple. Really fun plant, and how these leaves kind of mirror each other coming out in the garden. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other tender plants that Marcus has. This is, I don't know if you know this plant, it's a castor bean, a native to tropical East Africa. Here it is again. It can be very tall. It can be, it grows really rapidly and vigorously. It can be 6 to 10 feet tall as an annual. It's great for the back of the border from the spurge family. And then it has this kind of wine, a maroon color, and the bright red stems. These are the flowers, and these are these bizarre kind of spiny red seed pods. And at the end of the season in the fall, they turn brown and split open and reveal these beans that resemble European tick insects. But the seeds are, you have to be careful with the seeds. The toxin in castor seeds is ricin. Ricinus communis is the name of this plant. And ricin is one of the deadliest natural poisons. It's 6,000 times more poisonous than cyanide, 12,000 times more poisonous than rattlesnake venom, believe it or not. And all it would take would be like 4 seeds to kill somebody with it. But if you put it in the back of your border and you carefully gather the seeds, label them, put them out of the reach of children and pets, you shouldn't have a problem. The seed pods are way up high up on the plant, so you should be okay. This is also called the mole plant because you can plant it around your vegetable crops, things like potatoes, and it's said to repel these underground rodents like moles and voles, which I think is really cool. On the right side of the slide here is agapanthus, and Marcus has 4 different varieties of this one. This is a beautiful deep blue agapanthus called Storm Cloud. Marcus calls this a rather pricey annual, but he keeps it going. The agapanthus likes to be root bound, so he'll just leave it in the pot and sink the pot in the ground, and it's easier to maintain them and to lift them out in the fall. Here are a couple more of these tender plants, Cana lily, Cleopatra, and this was a real find for Marcus. I think it was at a plant warehouse that he found it for sale, and Marcus says the guy didn't know what he had, and it produces a beautiful yellow, bright yellow or bright red flower, really dazzling Cana for Cana lily in the garden. And on the other side is this purple Roscoe's lily. It's from the Himalayas, particularly Nepal. And that's important to know because it grows in much colder mountainous regions, and it's great for rock gardens. It grows on all different kinds of terrain. It's a member of the ginger family. It's an herb, and it produces maybe 1 or 2 flowers at a time. And the flowers can range from light purple to pink to white, depending upon which kind of plant you get. And in the Himalayas, it's pollinated by a long-tongued fly. It's a fly with one of the longest proboscis around, at least in the Himalayas. And they drop that proboscis way down to sip the nectar, and the plant touches the fly in doing so, they move the pollen around that way. So it's another cool plant. Marcus has lots of interesting impatiens varieties, and we know impatiens, the bedding plant, and which has been affected since 2011 by downy mildew. That's when it appeared in Minnesota. And these other kinds of impatiens are impacted as well, but they don't die from the fungal disease. The fungal disease really kills Impatiens walleriana, which is that bedding plant variety. And here are several of them. Poor man's orchid here on the left, Impatiens balfouri. It is a zone plant. Now these impatiens, I have to say, are an example of the risk of bringing plants and seeds from another state or another part of the world. Sometimes they do so well, they become invasive. This poor man's orchid, or touch me not, is actually restricted in Wisconsin by the DNR because it can invade wetlands and grasslands and marshes. So you have to grow it responsibly. It does eject seeds. That's why it's called touch me not. But it has this little landing zone for bees. The pollinators absolutely love these plants. Here's another one on the right. This is Roing balsam impatiens. It's new. In fact, it's likely that Marcus will be the first person you know who grows it. It was discovered in 2016 in a valley in the Indian Himalayas. And in India, it's known as an herb. And it has these oversized leaves that can be about 6 inches long. The plant can be about 4 to 6 feet in height. So you can even get those blossoms up at your eye level. It looks like a bird in flight. You do have to collect the seeds from this one too. Here's one more impatiens I want to show you, and there's the bee that's crawled down in there. This one's called policeman's helmet or ornamental jewelweed. It's also known as Himalayan balsam. It's native to India and Western Himalaya. It is considered invasive in several states because it spreads aggressively along riverbanks. So the seed capsules explode in mid-August, it has about 800 seeds on a plant. So you have to plant it, do so responsibly, and make sure that it's not spreading all over the place. One more another tender plant that Marcus grows, which I thought was just beautiful, is this tropical milkweed. I think Marcus told me that he overwintered this indoors the first year, but he discovered that it does naturally reseed. But you can see the caterpillar on here, the monarch caterpillar. The monarchs love this tropical milkweed. Very easy to grow and just blooms throughout the season. Another tender plant that I thought was really cool is this pineapple lily. It takes full sun, grows from a bulb, and the bulbs initially don't start blooming for a year. In Minnesota, you can start them in pots and then transplant them outdoors after the danger of frost has passed. You can also grow them in a container, deep container, put in the ground just so that you can save those bulbs. It has this pineapple lily. It has this top that looks like a pineapple. And then here's the blossom under the bud underneath. And here's the flower, which is a real stunning flower. This is a close-up showing you that pineapple top. And here's what it looks like. It's like a cone dog flower. You are near the state fairgrounds, so that's appropriate, right? This white with these pink centers, really striking tender plant in the garden. And a couple more tender foliage plants to mention. This begonia Paul Hernandez, it's from zone 9. So it has to be taken inside over winter. It's a light shade, but this becomes a shrub in California. It can grow 6 to 8 feet tall in California. It doesn't get that tall, nearly that tall here, but it does produce these dangling pink flowers, very pretty. But the foliage on this plant is just spectacular, and then these kind of pink hairy stems are great. And then this one on the right is a hardy tapioca or hardy cassava tree. It is a tree in Mexico and Argentina. Can grow to 12 feet tall, and it has these leaves that are like paddles on it, really interesting. Almost to me, it looks like the head of a spear, maybe something like that. But really cool. It does not have very showy flowers. The flowers are green, but the bees love the flowers on here. This is not native to the United States. And then I did throw in a couple of unusual finds. These are not on your handout today. They're not on your plant list yet, but I did want to point these out. This one is a blackberry lily or leopard lily. It's not a true lily, but actually a member of the iris family. And it's a short-lived perennial native to Eastern Russia, China, and Japan. But I just thought it was very charming. This is a columbine I wanted to mention called Gold Leaf, and the new foliage comes out. If it's in a sunny site, the foliage is yellow, and in the shade you get this vivid chartreuse. So what a cool columbine to have in your garden. And this last one is a Japanese ligularia that blooms in May, but it has this very jagged leaf. You can kind of see it down here, and a blossom that's like 3 to 4, it can be 3 to 4 inches in width. So very cool. And now let's talk a little bit about bromeliads. So Marcus first has experience with bromelia. We bought one on a trip to San Diego, probably brought it home in a suitcase. Started his love affair with bromeliads. And then he joined the St. Anthony Park Garden Club, and a member of the club encouraged Marcus to volunteer in the bromeliad department at the Como Park Conservatory, and his collection began to grow along with the plants. And you do have to wear gloves. They have serrated edges on the leaves. You can really see that in this picture. And these bromeliads are in the pineapple family. The world first began to know about bromeliads from Christopher Columbus 500 years ago. He brought the pineapple to Spain. So that was their first exposure, the Western world anyways, to bromeliads. And ever since, people, I think, have really loved the different colors. I wanted to show you a couple of them here. This one has this very beautiful aqua green kind of combo with a little bit of purple in there. This is a tank bromeliad. It's called a tank bromeliad. Because it has a reservoir here where the water collects. And when Marcus waters these, he waters them from overhead and flushes out this tank and adds water there. The plant can take water from this center spot. And these bromeliads, some bromeliads grow in the ground, some grow on and some grow on rocks or epiphytes. So they can take the water from here rather than from roots. And then the flowers, I'm going to show you a little bit more of these different great leaf blades with this horizontal striping, which is really cool. This one has got this jagged and spotty kind of leaf on it. Here's another one that's red with these green polka dots on there. You can get so many different colors. Here's another one with a stripe. So they do flower, some more significantly than others. This one, this Norregalia plant, the flowers are just tiny. I've used a very close-up lens to get a picture of these little flowers in here. They barely rise above the water in the center of the plant. So these plants are primarily grown for their colorful foliage. And then other bromeliads will flower like this, pretty spectacularly. And you get these very fluorescent red and purple and white flower out of this bromeliad. And then this one is just like a fluorescent orange. And once the bromeliads only flower a single time, and then the mother plant eventually declines and dies. But before it dies, the plant, there are new plantlets form. There are pups. They feed off the mother plant, and you can eventually break those off and repot them up, and then you have a new plant. So that's a lot of fun about bromeliads. And Marcus, if you want to join me again here, and we'll talk a little bit about what you do to overwinter plants. So over here on this side, you're digging up a pineapple lily, right? And tell me a little bit about what you do to store that.
Yes, dig up the pineapple lily there. And so I take that tuber, shake off some of the soil, and then I put it in the garage to have the soil dry, shake off the soil about a week later after it's dried, and then break off the foliage, put it in some sphagnum moss, and then I store those in our basement, which is currently just under 50 degrees.
Good deal. And then this one is the tree of India, that big tuber we were talking about.
Yes, and on those, the foliage above the ground dies before fall hits. And so I let that desiccate, all that nutrition goes into the bulb, but then I dig up the bulb, and as you can see on that, it looks like there are several smaller bulbs around the perimeter, and that's one of the ways that it multiplies.
Oh, okay.
So some of those will break off, and I store that in some sphagnum also in the basement.
And you did tell me that the first year they started blooming in the bag. And what happens?
Yes, I do need to keep an eye on that. And actually, each year they start sprouting up before anything else. And the first thing is the flower that, yes, really smells atrocious. So I need to keep an eye on it. And typically they get moved into the garage when the flower starts to open, because it's too cold for them to go outside, because they're coming up in April and May. When it's too cold for them to be outside here.
And then here's a little bit showing, I did not take any pictures in your garage, but Marcus, you've got hundreds of plants that are stored either in your sunroom and in all rooms of the house, right? And in the garage.
Yes, in the winter, there are plants all over the house, and it's tropical jungle inside. Come spring and summer, almost all of them end up going outside, and they're thrilled to get outside and enjoy our warm summers.
And then you also gather seeds. So here are those castor bean seeds. You can see those in Marcus's hand. And then you've got these little seed bags on the chocolate daisy.
Yes, I will often put the little bags over flowers to collect the seeds. I will do that with impatience, because those seeds explode, and then, well, you're not going to find the seeds if they explode into the gravel. So they explode into that bag. In this case, I had to put the bag over the chocolate daisy, not because they explode, but because the rabbits like to come and eat the seeds when they're ripe.
Okay.
And they won't eat the bag, so.
Oh, okay, okay. So this chocolate daisy, I did want to mention, is a zone 4 plant. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall, but the stems bend down. So it's a kind of a recumbent plant. It kind of arches down like that, right? But its greatest feature is the flowers. And tell us about the flowers.
Yes, the flowers themselves, I think, are quite beautiful with the yellow, and they have a sort of a reddish string that comes out the center, but its main feature is its scent. Early in the day when the weather warms up, they smell like warm chocolate brownies.
Oh.
Other plants that they say smell like chocolate, but these really take, well, they take the brownie.
That is so cool. So you go out there and sniff a little bit, right?
Yes, that's another layer of gardening is fragrance, and not just your standard beautiful rose scent, but so many other fragrances also like chocolate.
Oh, that's great. Okay, and then I'm just let's go to your list of garden tips. And maybe you can talk just briefly about each of these. So your mantra is to experiment, right?
Well, yes, if you don't try, you won't know. And so I experiment, I work and listen to other gardeners. They have lots of great ideas, and something that works for them may or may not work in your garden, and vice versa. But yeah, try new things.
And here's an example of how you are playing with leaf shapes. This is another farfugium. It's not a ginger plant, it's that farfugium. And the hosta, obviously, playing with the different leaf shapes.
Yes, leaf shapes and textures, as well as glossy on the Fordyceae, and then flat on the hosta, and then you have the sharp tooth edge that is somewhat on the hosta, as well as that Japanese rose there.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about the zone pushing, what you do for that.
Well, with the zone pushing, I guess it's kind of because I'm stubborn and I want to have more than what I'm just able to find at the local nurseries. So some things I do mail order, but planting closer to the house for some added warmth. And come fall, I make sure that I mulch heavily. We take the leaves from the trees, I run over them with a lawnmower, pile them heavily along with pine needles. And then once we have snow, I actually have to shovel the snow over close to the house because of the eaves. It doesn't pile up there. Yeah. But snow is a great insulator.
Yeah, yeah. You must have a lot of snow piled up right now today, right?
Yes, yes. I made sure that with this cold snap, I shoveled and added additional snow in those areas.
Okay, okay. And you wanted this tip about overwintering plants in your garage, what you do.
Oh, yes. Well, some things need a cold period in the winter, not necessarily as cold as outside here. So those go in the garage, but you do have to water them every now and again. I have unfortunately gone to each extreme where I have forgotten to water them and they've died, or overwatered them and then they mildew.
Yeah.
So there is a balance, and every couple of weeks, go out and lightly water, stick your finger in to test the soil moisture.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got a lot of work to do in the fall to bring those in and the spring to take them out. But I know you feel like that kind of limits your plant palette if you don't have those plants in your garden, right?
It would, yes. I really enjoy having the wide variety of plants. And again, if I don't try it, I won't know. So.
That's great. One of the things I wanted to include in our presentation today is some plant resources. So these are some plants that, resources that Marcus likes to use. Is there a particular favorite among these?
Each one is a particular favorite for different reasons. Far Reaches, I would say, has the widest variety of unusual plants. And then the Cartouche Greenhouse, they were in San Diego. I have visited them and brought plants back in my suitcase from them. And additionally, visiting local nurseries. As I said, we have so many great places around here also, not just the big box places, but smaller, locally owned. And if you visit them on a regular basis, things change. That's where I found the beautiful Cleopatra. It wasn't something that was there normally. It was just a fluke that was there when I showed up that particular time.
Lucky you. And
yes.
Then I just have to mention, there are these plastic dinosaurs throughout Marcus's garden, and he likes to place them in interesting places around the foliage and the plants, right?
Yes, just on a road trip one year, we had stopped in a small drugstore for something, and the old-fashioned drugstores have everything, including a toy department. And that was my first dinosaur about 15 years ago. And now whenever we go traveling, whether it's in the US or abroad, I will pick up another dinosaur to add to the collection. And they're winter hardy too.
No wonder you need another suitcase. You need it for dinosaurs and, and plants.
As well.
Well, this is a good time to stop and see if we have some questions out there. Maura, do you want to jump back on and let us know what people are wondering about? Any questions?
Well, since no one else is speaking up right at this moment, Gail, this is the first time I've seen the presentation that you put together. And I must say, I'm very impressed. I think you did a beautiful job. And I learned many different things about some of the plants that I have.
Oh.
You did more research behind them and where they came from. So I want to thank you.
Oh.
I learned a great deal.
Oh, good. Good, I'm glad.
Gail, why don't I ask the questions then? I don't know.
Go ahead.
Marcus, did you have to amend your soil when you lived in Washington, or is that soil like really excellent over there?
Well, actually, I have amended the soil both in Sammamish, Washington, as well as here. The soil here and there tended to be a little too well draining. So yes, I add lots of organic matter, and mulching each year adds to that as it breaks down through the course of the year.
See, Ruth, can you see any of the questions in chat? I can't see them.
Yes, I'm gonna give you the questions in chat.
Okay.
What variety of coneflower is in your front yard?
I would have to see it to know. There are several different.
It was a slide with a bright pink, pink coneflower that was in a big circle, like in the grass.
Let me
away
see
from the house.
I off the top of my head, unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you.
It's that one.
I have, yes.
It's a purpurea, Echinacea purpurea, but
very good, thank you.
Yeah, it is a nice pink, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you, Esther, for that question. Does your shield leaf winter in the ground outdoors through the winter and survive? The leaf plant?
The shield leaf, the Ligularia?
This one.
That one.
Ah,
with the big
yes.
table leaf.
Yes, that has made it through 2 winters already in that spot. It seems to do very well, and it is slowly increasing in size.
Great.
How much do the animals eat the leaves of your plants? And do you have a lot of rabbits? And then also, how cold does your garage get when you put plants in the garage?
The only animals that really seem to nibble on things, occasionally we get, yes, rabbits in the yard. I have tried to discourage that and put up some chicken wire around the base of the open part of the fence. We don't really have a huge slug problem here. I know other Minnesotans would disagree with me, but coming from California and Washington State, where you can grill these things and have them for dinner. The slugs here are minuscule and really don't.
What are we complaining about?
And the garage, it's a large garage. It's quasi-insulated. Right now, it's actually 32 out there. I do have a small heater that I have on a low setting so that it just doesn't get, well, right now it's -10 outside. No. So about 32 is as cold as it gets, but typically it's about 40 in the winter.
Okay, from Karen, what kinds of hosta is that very white one that was in the picture? And do you have hints on successful growing it with so much variegation? Not really sure what you meant by that.
I remember we tried to look this one up, Marcus, do you remember? And,
yes.
And you didn't have the particular variety. That's
Yeah.
where the plant labeling kind of eluded you.
Yes, unfortunately, I do try to be very good about plant labels, and I keep them with the plants, but occasionally a label does disappear. And as your questioner alluded to, the variegation does seem to change over time on a lot of different hostas. Some are more stable than others, and some of it has to do with the sun and the shade and even moisture conditions year to year.
Right, right. But this is a beautiful, beautiful variety. I love the white.
I agree.
It really adds a lot of light in your garden when you have a chartreuse or a white hosta like that. That's really, really something, that creamy look. What else, Ruth? What?
Well, that's the end of the questions.
Okay.
And no one is typing anymore.
Okay.
Hold it. I got another question. Does the white portion of the hosta, does that burn easily?
I have not had an issue with the hostas burning here. No.
Okay, this is I should point out, this is one of the lilies that Marcus has. I didn't have time to show all of the beautiful Asiatic lilies, but he does also bring a lot of color in the garden with these Asiatic lilies.
Yes.
And
that's another portion of layering, having other plants that are interplanted among those, including some ground covers that are there before, and then taller plants that are there after.
I see Diane has peeked up here. Diane, do you have a question?
I sent my questions directly to Marcus, so he has to read them on his screen.
Okay.
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 What medium do I plant my bromeliads in? The bromeliads I plant in a combination of some sand along with some bark and a little bit of loomy soil also. In addition to that, I do put some pebbles that I intermix in with the mix, mostly to give the pot some weight, because bromeliads tend to be very top heavy and they'll fall over.
Good idea.
Yeah, but they want great drainage with some moisture retention.
Okay. Anything else, Diane?
Have you ever tried Erycema Socokianum or Candidicium?
The last one, I do not know. The first one, the Socokianum, yes. I have a small collection of those out in the garden, some with variegated leaves, some without. And our first year here, the one that I had brought with me from Washington, decided she was going to be female that year and gave me seeds. So I cleaned the seeds and planted those, and I have a bunch of single leaf babies as of last spring.
One more question, Diane.
I have several varieties of aroids that you don't mention. Would you like to swap corms of things you might have that? Okay, I'll get your email from Gail and we'll do a little swapping.
That sounds wonderful. You can never have too many stinky plants.
That's right.
Ruth, are there any more questions in the chat?
No, but Julie Condon remarked that she saw her first blackberry lily this past summer on the east side of Centennial Lakes.
Oh, cool.
She said she literally freaked, and it's the coolest plant.
Yeah, yeah, it is cool. Okay, I want to mention one more thing that I'm going to throw it back to you, Ruth. So next month in Northern Gardener, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to plug this. I've written this article about an international vegetable garden. And Diane, you probably recognize this because I know you visited Russ Stanton. He's a gardener in Edina. Who makes cross-cultural connections to neighbors and the people he meets by growing unusual vegetables from around the world. And he says it's a great way to connect with people, especially from other parts of the world. So you can read about the diplomatic power of a homegrown vegetable. Diane, you'll have to mute yourself again, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. There you go. And Russ has also won a lot of state fair ribbons for his vegetables. So this is an Oppo squash that people in India, they grow that, and Thailand, in that part of the world. And he's won blue ribbons for the longest squash, the longest bean. And this past summer, he attempted to grow a big baby tomato. It's supposed to be a tomato the size of a baby. Can you imagine? 8 to 10 pounds. You can read about whether he achieved that. He did get a whopper of a tomato. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Marcus in particular for joining me. I really appreciate it. I think it makes it a lot more fun. And thanks to everyone too for being here, and be safe and stay healthy, right? And remember that restorative power of your garden. So Ruth, do you want to take it back?
Yes. Thank you again for everybody for viewing this, and thank you to Gail and Marcus for this wonderful presentation. And remember, this can be viewed again on edinagardencouncil.org website, and probably be put on YouTube in the future too. So thanks again for coming, and have a good day. Be safe.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Stay warm.